There is a very particular kind of silence that falls over an airplane cabin when power suddenly shifts. It is not peaceful silence. It is the kind of suffocating stillness that arrives just before a storm breaks. High above the tarmac, a badge can sometimes feel like absolute authority, a trump card meant to end every argument. But aboard a flight leaving Chicago, an arrogant off-duty police inspector believed his heavy metal shield gave him the right to humiliate a decorated Black Navy veteran seated quietly in first class. He expected the man to lower his head and move to coach. He expected the flight crew to obey without question. What he did not expect was the cockpit door opening, or the devastating career-ending karma that was about to strike him in the air. The terminal at O'Hare International Airport was a chaotic symphony of rolling suitcases, delayed boarding announcements, and the weary groans of stranded travelers. Outside, a heavy Midwest downpour hammered the floor-to-ceiling windows, smearing the flashing lights of baggage carts as they moved across the slick tarmac. Lieutenant Commander Calvin Drayton paid no attention to the storm. He sat perfectly still in one of the uncomfortable vinyl chairs near the gate, an island of discipline in a sea of exhausted civilians. Calvin carried the quiet, formidable weight of a man who had spent years making life-and-death decisions under unimaginable pressure. He wore his navy dress blues not out of vanity, but because he had no other choice. His trip home had been arranged in a rush after a grueling deployment in the South China Sea, and his sea bag had already been routed ahead. His uniform was immaculate. The gold stripes on his sleeves caught the harsh fluorescent light. The ribbons on his chest told a silent story of valor, sacrifice, and survival. He was tired in a way coffee could never touch. It was bone-deep, soul-heavy exhaustion. All he wanted was to sleep through the flight and wake up in Seattle, where his wife, Alina, and his daughter, Brielle, would be waiting near the arrivals gate. It had been far too long since he had held them. Calvin blinked, pulling himself out of fatigue, and stood when the gate agent waved him over. Her name tag read Patrice. "Yes, ma'am," Calvin said, his voice a deep, resonant baritone. Patrice offered him a warm, empathetic smile. "Thank you for your service, Commander. I noticed you were booked in a middle seat near the lavatory. After the deployment you've probably had, that didn't feel right. We had a cancellation, so I moved you up to first class. Seat 2A. Window seat. You'll have room to stretch out." A rare wave of relief moved through Calvin's chest. He gave her a crisp, sincere nod. "You have no idea how much I appreciate that, Patrice. Thank you. Truly, it's the least we can do. We'll begin boarding soon." When boarding began, Calvin walked down the jet bridge, the heavy fabric of his coat brushing against the corrugated walls. As he stepped onto the Boeing 737, he was greeted by the lead flight attendant, Marissa Bell, a seasoned professional with sharp eyes and a calm, welcoming presence. She noticed his uniform, gave a respectful nod, and directed him to his seat on the left side of the aircraft. Seat 2A felt like a sanctuary. Wide leather cushions, generous legroom, the low hum of the auxiliary power unit vibrating softly through the walls. Calvin placed his cover in the overhead bin, settled into the seat, and closed his eyes. The tension in his shoulders finally began to loosen. He accepted a glass of sparkling water from Marissa and watched rain streak across the small oval window. For a brief stretch, there was peace. Then the heavy footsteps came down the aisle. Boarding was always messy, but some people had a way of announcing themselves louder than everyone else. Deputy Inspector Wade Brackett was one of those people. He was a broad, red-faced man with a thick neck and a tailored suit that still somehow looked wrong on him. Wade moved through the narrow aisle with the bullish entitlement of someone who believed the world existed to serve him. Behind him came his wife, Camille, a woman whose lips seemed permanently pressed into a thin line of dissatisfaction. Wade was a senior deputy inspector with a major metropolitan police department. In his jurisdiction, his word had long been treated as law. His mood controlled the temperature of any room he entered, and his badge had become a skeleton key to whatever he wanted. Off-duty, he expected the same treatment. Wade stopped beside row 2, blocking the flow of passengers behind him. He looked down at his boarding passes, then at the seats. "Unbelievable," he grumbled loudly, his voice cutting easily through the cabin noise. "They split us up. I've got 2B and you're in 3B. Typical airline incompetence. "Wade, do something," Camille whined, clutching her designer handbag. "I am not sitting next to a stranger for this flight." "Don't worry," Wade said smoothly. "I'll handle it." Then he turned his attention toward seat 2A, toward Calvin. Wade's eyes swept over the black man seated by the window. He saw the crisp Navy uniform, the gold rank insignia, and the calm bearing of a man who had earned every inch of his dignity. But instead of respect, a dark irritation sparked in Wade's eyes. To a man used to unchecked authority, anyone who looked too comfortable, too dignified, and did not fit his narrow, prejudiced idea of success was an insult. Wade cleared his throat loudly. "Excuse me. Hey, pal." Calvin opened his eyes slowly and looked up at the red-faced man looming over him. "Can I help you, sir?" "You're in the wrong seat," Wade said. It was not a question. It was a command. Calvin did not flinch. He reached into his breast pocket, removed the freshly printed boarding pass Patrice had given him, and checked it. "I don't believe I am. The gate agent assigned me 2A. "Well, she made a mistake," Wade snapped, folding his arms across his chest. The boarding process had come to a halt behind him. A line of frustrated passengers now stretched back into the jet bridge. "My wife and I need to sit together," Wade continued. "I'm in 2B. She's in 3B. You're going to move to 3B so she can have the window." It was not a request. It was an order from a man who had clearly not been told no often enough. Calvin remained composed. His voice stayed level and polite. "Sir, I'm willing to consider a swap if the seats are equivalent, but moving to another row is not something I'm required to do. I was assigned this seat, and I'd prefer to keep it. It has been a very long journey." Camille let out a dramatic gasp. "Wade, did he really just say no?" Wade's ruddy face darkened into a mottled crimson. Calvin's calm refusal struck his ego like a slap. He leaned closer, invading Calvin's personal space. The smell of stale bourbon and expensive cologne drifted off his suit. "Listen to me very carefully," Wade said, his voice dropping into a menacing growl. "I don't care about your long journey. I don't know who you impressed at the gate to get an affirmative action upgrade, but I paid full price for my tickets. You are going to get up, grab your things, and move back." The racial implication hung in the air, thick and toxic. A businessman across the aisle in 2C looked up from his tablet, his eyes widening. Whispers began to ripple through first class. Calvin's expression hardened. The polite softness disappeared from his face, replaced by the stoic, impenetrable mask of a military officer confronting a hostile threat. He had faced warlords, navigated dangerous international waters, and led men through real fire. An entitled bully in a cheap suit was not going to break his bearing. "I suggest you step back, sir," Calvin said, his voice dropping into a sharper register of command. "I'm not moving. Please take your assigned seat so the rest of the passengers can board." Wade was stunned. The defiance enraged him. He reached into the inner pocket of his suit and dramatically flipped open a leather wallet, revealing a gleaming gold police inspector's badge. He shoved it directly into Calvin's line of sight. "Do you see this?" Wade hissed. "I am Deputy Inspector Brackett. I am a sworn law enforcement officer, and my jurisdiction stretches further than you can comprehend. You are causing a disturbance. You are interfering with my travel and threatening my wife. Now get out of that seat before I have you pulled off this aircraft in zip ties." Calvin looked at the badge, then back into Wade's furious eyes. He did not blink. "Your jurisdiction ends at the airport doors, Inspector. Unless you have a federal warrant tucked behind that piece of tin, you have absolutely no authority on this aircraft. Now step out of my space." "What is going on here?" Marissa Bell, the lead flight attendant, hurried down the aisle. Her brow was tight with concern. She squeezed past a frustrated passenger and stepped between Wade and Calvin. "Gentlemen, is there a problem? We need to clear the aisle." Wade immediately turned toward her, using his size to loom over the flight attendant. He flashed the badge in her face. "Yes, there is a massive problem," Wade barked. "I am an off-duty inspector. This individual is sitting in my wife's seat. He is acting belligerently, refusing to comply with a lawful order, and making me and my wife feel extremely unsafe. Given the current climate, I consider him a security risk. I want him removed from first class immediately and sent back to coach where he belongs. Better yet, throw him off the flight entirely. Marissa looked at Calvin, then back at Wade. She was a professional, but she was also human. The sudden appearance of a police badge and the phrase security risk visibly rattled her. "Sir," she said to Wade, keeping her voice as steady as possible, "let me check his boarding pass." "I already told you he shouldn't be here," Wade snapped. "Look at him. Does he look like he bought a first-class ticket? He probably bought that costume at a surplus store to scam an upgrade. This is stolen valor. I want him moved now." The accusation struck the cabin like thunder. Gasps rose from the surrounding seats. To accuse a man wearing the uniform of a United States Navy lieutenant commander, complete with warfare pins and deployment ribbons, of faking his service was an insult of the highest order. Calvin's jaw clenched so hard that the muscle moved beneath his skin. His hands rested in his lap, curling into fists, but he forced them to relax. Slowly, he unbuttoned his breast pocket, retrieved his military ID, and handed it to Marissa along with his boarding pass. "Lieutenant Commander Calvin Drayton, United States Navy," he said clearly, making sure the nearby passengers could hear. "Returning from a combat deployment. Upgraded at the gate by Agent Patrice. I am exactly where I am supposed to be, ma'am." Marissa examined the military ID. It was unquestionably authentic. She handed it back with a soft, apologetic look. Then she turned to Wade, her posture firming. "Inspector Brackett, this gentleman has a valid boarding pass for 2A, and his military credentials are real. He is not a security risk, and he is not moving. I must ask you and your wife to take your assigned seats so we can finish boarding." Wade's face twisted into pure, unfiltered rage. He had played his trump card, his badge, his authority, his intimidation, and it had failed completely in front of a cabin full of business travelers. He had been humiliated by a flight attendant, and a black man he considered beneath him. "You listen to me, you glorified waitress," Wade spat, pointing directly in Marissa's face. "You do not tell me what to do. I am a sworn officer of the law. If I say this man is a threat, then he is a threat. I am not sitting on this flight while my wife is subjected to the presence of a hostile, insubordinate thug wearing a stolen uniform." "Wade, just get him arrested," Camille cried from the aisle. "He's practically assaulting us with his attitude." "I demand to see the captain!" Wade roared, slamming his palm against the overhead compartment. The loud bang made several passengers jump. "I will call the Port Authority right now. I will have this plane grounded. I will have you fired, and I will have him dragged out of here in handcuffs. Get the captain out here right now." The tension in the cabin reached a breaking point. Boarding had stopped completely. Passengers in economy stood on their toes, trying to see what was happening. A businessman in row 3 had pulled out his phone and started recording. Calvin slowly unbuckled his seatbelt and stood. Even in the cramped space of the aircraft, his presence was commanding. He stood face to face with Wade, only inches away. "Do not yell at this woman," Calvin said, his voice deadly quiet and completely without fear. "She is doing her job. You are throwing a tantrum because you could not bully your way into a seat. You are a disgrace to whatever badge you carry." "I'll break your jaw, you son of a—" Wade snarled, balling his hands into fists and stepping forward aggressively. "Sir, step back," Marissa shouted, panic finally cutting through her professional mask as she reached for the intercom phone near the bulkhead. Before Wade could swing, before Calvin could brace himself, and before Marissa could call for help, a sharp electronic buzz sounded from the front of the cabin. Everyone froze. The reinforced cockpit door opened with a hydraulic hiss. Captain Graham Whitaker stepped out from the flight deck. He was a tall, lean man with silver hair clipped close at the sides, and the unmistakable aura of someone who commanded respect without needing to demand it. 4 stripes marked his epaulets. His eyes, cold and sharp as cracked ice, swept over the chaos in first class. At first, Captain Whitaker said nothing. He simply looked. He looked at his shaken flight attendant. He looked at the furious red-faced man holding a police badge. Then he looked at the man standing tall in navy dress blues. The silence in the cabin became deafening. Even the storm outside seemed to fade. I could hear the shouting through a reinforced bulkhead, Captain Whitaker said at last, his voice low and gravelly, carrying effortless authority. He stepped fully into the cabin and fixed his gaze on Wade. So, who exactly is threatening to ground my aircraft? Wade lowered his raised fist, though the belligerent sneer remained on his face. He puffed out his chest, trying to use his size to intimidate the lean, silver-haired pilot. To Wade, a captain was just a glorified bus driver in a fancy suit. He believed his municipal police badge carried weight anywhere in the country. "I'm the one who is going to ground this flight, Captain," Wade declared, his voice full of unearned confidence. He thrust his leather wallet forward again, the gold badge catching the overhead reading lights. "Deputy Inspector Wade Brackett, Major Crimes Division. I have a situation here that your flight attendant is entirely unequipped to handle." Captain Graham Whitaker did not look at the badge. He kept his steely eyes locked on Wade's bloodshot stare. Then he slowly crossed his arms over his chest. "Is that so?" Captain Whitaker asked, his voice dangerously calm. "And what exactly constitutes a situation in my first-class cabin?" Wade gestured dismissively toward Calvin, who remained standing, posture perfect and face controlled. "This individual is sitting in my wife's assigned seat. When I ordered him to relocate, he became combative. He is hostile. He is refusing a lawful command from a sworn officer. And frankly, I am questioning the authenticity of that uniform. This is a textbook case of stolen valor used to defraud your airline for a premium seat. He is a security risk, and I want him removed now." A murmur of disbelief moved through the nearby rows. Camille, standing behind her husband, nodded vigorously. "He threatened us, Captain. He practically lunged at my husband." Marissa immediately stepped forward. Her voice trembled slightly, but it carried righteous anger. "Captain Whitaker, that is completely false. This passenger was upgraded at the gate by Patrice. He has a valid boarding pass for 2A. He has been nothing but polite." Inspector Brackett approached him, demanded that he move, and became verbally abusive and physically aggressive when he declined. Wade spun toward her. "Shut your mouth, you lying!" "Enough." Captain Whitaker did not shout. He did not need to. The single word cut through the cabin like a blade, carrying the unquestionable weight of the pilot in command. Wade actually took half a step back, startled by the force behind it. Captain Whitaker uncrossed his arms and stepped closer. "Let me explain something to you, Inspector Brackett," he began, his voice dropping into an icy register. "When those cabin doors close, and even while we remain connected to this jet bridge, this aircraft is not your jurisdiction. It is federal jurisdiction. And inside this metal tube, I am the ultimate authority. Not the mayor, not your police chief, and certainly not an off-duty cop throwing a tantrum over a window seat." Wade's face flushed a dangerous purple. "You listen to me." "No, you will listen to me," Captain Whitaker interrupted, his eyes narrowing. "Interfering with a flight crew is a federal offense under Title 49 of the United States Code. Shouting at my lead flight attendant, threatening physical violence against another passenger, and attempting to disrupt the boarding process are all textbook violations. You are standing on very thin ice, Inspector." Wade was seething, his knuckles turned white around the handle of his briefcase. He was not used to being spoken to this way, especially in public. He sneered and pointed at Calvin. "You're taking his word over mine. A decorated law enforcement officer? Look at him. I guarantee you that uniform is a costume. You're harboring a fraud." Captain Whitaker finally turned his full attention to Calvin. He studied the impeccable navy dress blues. He saw the gold oak leaf of a lieutenant commander on the collar. His eyes moved to the rows of ribbons pinned to Calvin's chest. Then the captain's expression changed. The icy anger softened it into something deeper. Recognition, respect, solemn understanding. Captain Whitaker stepped closer to Calvin. He did not ask for a boarding pass. He did not ask for a military ID. Instead, he pointed to a specific ribbon framed in gold among the others. "Presidential Unit Citation," Captain Whitaker said softly. His eyes moved slightly. "Combat Action Ribbon, 2 bronze stars." Then his gaze settled on the silver emblem above the ribbons. "And a trident. Naval Special Warfare." Calvin gave a slow, respectful nod. "Yes, sir. Just returning from a rotational deployment." Captain Whitaker let out a long breath. The tension in his shoulders shifted from anger to deep pride. He extended his hand. Graham Whitaker, Captain, United States Navy, retired, flew F-14S off the Nimitz. Calvin's stoic mask finally broke into a genuine smile. He gripped the captain's hand firmly. "Lieutenant Commander Calvin Drayton, sir. Honor to meet you." "The honor is mine, Commander," Captain Whitaker said, clapping Calvin on the shoulder. "Welcome home." The cabin was dead silent. The passengers who had been recording lowered their phones, stunned by the almost cinematic reality of what was unfolding in front of them. Captain Whitaker slowly turned back to Wade. The warmth vanished from his face. In its place came a storm of controlled fury. "You accuse this man of stolen valor," he said, his voice vibrating with barely contained rage. "You stand there, a civil servant sworn to protect and serve, and hurl racist, baseless accusations at a decorated Navy SEAL returning from combat deployment. You threatened him. You threatened my crew. You disrupted my flight." Wade was cornered, but his pride was too toxic to let him retreat. "This is ridiculous," he snapped. "I don't care what little club you two belong to. I am a deputy inspector. I bought a first-class ticket, and I demand that he be moved. Otherwise, I'm walking off this plane and filing a massive lawsuit against this airline." That was the fatal mistake. Captain Whitaker did not blink. He simply nodded, cold finality settling over his face. "You are not walking anywhere, Mr. Brackett," he said, deliberately stripping Wade of his title. He turned to Marissa. "Marissa, call Port Authority Police and request federal air marshals. Tell them we have a level 2 threat on board. Disruptive passenger interfering with a flight crew and threatening a federal officer." Camille shrieked, clutching at her necklace in panic. "Wade, what is he doing? Stop him!" Wade's arrogant mask finally cracked. Panic seeped through. "Wait a minute, Captain. Let's not overreact. I'm just trying to sit with my wife. You don't need to call local police. I am the police." "Not here, you aren't," Whitaker fired back. "And you're right. I'm not just calling local police. I'm calling the feds. You wanted to escalate this. Congratulations. You reached the top floor." Boarding officially halted. The remaining passengers in the terminal were held back. Inside the first-class cabin, no one spoke. Wade stood in the aisle, his face turning a sickly shade of gray as the reality of his actions slowly suffocated his ego. He tried to pull out his phone, perhaps to call a sympathetic superior, but his hands shook so badly that it dropped onto the carpet. Calvin returned to seat 2A. He did not gloat. He did not smile. He simply sat down, adjusted his cuffs, and looked out the window at the rain. He treated Wade with the most devastating weapon of all, complete indifference. Heavy footsteps echoed down the jet bridge. 4 officers boarded the aircraft. 2 were uniformed Chicago Police Department officers assigned to O'Hare. The other 2 wore plain clothes with tactical vests and federal badges clipped to their belts. Federal air marshals. The lead Port Authority officer, Sergeant Nolan Price, stepped into the cabin. He took in the scene. The furious captain, the distressed flight attendant, the Navy SEAL sitting quietly, and the pale, sweating man blocking the aisle. Wade's eyes lit with desperate hope when he saw the local uniforms. "Sergeant, thank God," Wade said, stepping forward and reaching for his wallet again. "Deputy Inspector Brackett, Major Crimes. This pilot has completely lost his mind. I need you to escort this man off the plane immediately." He pointed at Calvin. Sergeant Price did not even look at the badge. He looked past Wade directly at Captain Whitaker. "Captain," he said respectfully, "what's the situation?" "This passenger," Whitaker said, pointing squarely at Wade, "physically threatened a member of my flight crew, verbally assaulted another passenger, attempted to use his municipal badge to override federal aviation regulations, and refused a direct order to stand down. I want him and his traveling companion removed from my aircraft immediately. They are a danger to this flight." Wade gasped. "Price, I am a deputy inspector. You work for the same city I do. You are not going to disrespect a superior officer." Sergeant Price finally looked at him. There was no brotherhood in his eyes, only the exhausted disgust of a cop watching another man disgrace the badge. "Inspector Brackett," Sergeant Price said flatly, "the captain of this aircraft has legally denied you transport. The federal air marshals are taking lead on the charge of interfering with the flight crew. I need you to step off the aircraft right now." "I'm not going anywhere," Wade shouted, his voice cracking, spit flying from his lips. "I have rights. Do you know who I am? I'll have your badge, Price. I'll have you walking the worst beat in this city until you retire." One of the federal air marshals, a broad-shouldered man named Everett Sloan, stepped forward. He had no patience for municipal politics. He unclipped a pair of heavy steel handcuffs from his belt. The metallic click was the loudest sound in the cabin. "Mr. Brackett," Marshal Sloan said, his voice low and rough, "you have two choices. You can walk off this aircraft under your own power, or I can drag you off in irons, which will guarantee you make the news. And to be perfectly clear, the moment you threatened a flight attendant and refused the captain's order, you committed a federal felony. I don't care if you are the chief of police. Turn around and put your hands behind your back." The finality of the federal marshal's words destroyed whatever remained of Wade's ego. The staggering magnitude of his mistake crashed down on him. A federal felony meant the likely end of his badge. It meant his pension was in danger. It meant ruin, complete and irreversible. Camille began to sob, a thin, high-pitched wail. "Wade, do something. We're going to miss our cruise." Wade said nothing. He could not. His shoulders slumped. He turned slowly, all fight drained out of him. He did not need the handcuffs to understand he was finished. As Marshal Sloan and Sergeant Price escorted the disgraced off-duty inspector down the aisle, a spontaneous sound rose from row 3. It began as a slow clap from the businessman who had been recording. Then the woman beside him joined. Then more passengers followed. The first-class cabin and the visible rows of economy erupted into thunderous applause and cheers. Wade Brackett walked the agonizing, humiliating path toward the jet bridge while strangers celebrated his downfall. He had demanded respect, and in return, he received the loudest public humiliation of his life. Captain Whitaker watched him go, then turned to the cabin. "Ladies and gentlemen, I apologize for the delay. We will resume boarding and get you on your way." Then he turned back toward seat 2A. Calvin looked at him with quiet gratitude in his eyes. "Thank you, Captain," Calvin said softly. Whitaker smiled warmly. "Get some sleep, Commander. Drinks are on me for the flight. You've earned a quiet trip home." As the aircraft finally pushed back from the gate, its twin engines powering up to carry Lieutenant Commander Calvin Drayton through the heavy Chicago storm clouds and into the peaceful stratosphere above, Wade Brackett's world was crashing violently back to Earth. There was no VIP treatment. There was no professional courtesy extended from one badge to another. Instead of being marched through the crowded terminal where he might have preserved a shred of dignity, Wade was escorted through an unmarked security door leading into the hidden underbelly of O'Hare International Airport. Federal Air Marshal Everett Sloan walked on one side of him. Sergeant Nolan Price walked on the other. They led him through stark, concrete corridors. The sounds of the airport faded behind them. Rolling suitcases, boarding announcements, excited travelers. In their place came the hollow echo of boots against linoleum. The air no longer smelled of coffee or duty-free perfume. It smelled of industrial bleach, stale sweat, and institutional confinement. Camille had been separated from him almost immediately after leaving the jet bridge. She was taken to a different holding area for questioning, her shrill complaints echoing down the hallway. "You can't do this. We have non-refundable tickets to Cabo San Lucas," she cried, her voice cracking between entitlement and fear. "My husband is a deputy inspector. We are missing our cruise." Her protests ended when a stern TSA supervisor stepped into her path, pointed to a plastic chair, and ordered her to remain silent or face obstruction charges of her own. Wade watched his wife's expression collapse from haughty outrage into pure terror as a heavy steel door shut between them, cutting him off from the last visible piece of his comfortable life. Wade was taken to a sterile, windowless interrogation room deep inside the Federal Security Annex. The walls were made of cinder block painted a sickly, institutional beige. A metal table was bolted to the concrete floor, surrounded by uncomfortable steel chairs. A caged fluorescent light buzzed overhead, and a camera stared down from the corner, its red recording light blinking steadily. For a man who had spent his career putting suspects into rooms exactly like this, sitting on the other side of the bolted table was psychologically shattering. He knew the tactics. He knew the freezing temperature was meant to keep a suspect uncomfortable. He knew the suffocating silence was meant to breed paranoia. Knowing the psychology did not protect him from it. It made the terror worse. He sat rigid in the chair, his expensive but ill-fitting suit now rumpled and damp with cold sweat. His hands trembled in his lap. The steel door eventually clicked open. Federal Air Marshal Sloan stepped inside, his broad shoulders filling the doorway. Beside him was another man in a tailored charcoal suit, carrying a thick manila folder. The newcomer had the cold, detached demeanor of a predator watching cornered prey. He walked to the table, pulled out the chair opposite Wade, and sat down. Then he placed the folder onto the metal surface with a soft, authoritative slap. "Mr. Brackett," the man said, his voice flat and emotionless, a clinical baritone that chilled Wade's spine. "I'm Special Agent Ronan Vale with the Federal Bureau of Investigation, assigned to the Joint Terrorism Task Force in Aviation Security. Marshal Sloan has briefed me on the incident aboard your flight." Wade swallowed hard. His throat felt like sandpaper. The mention of the FBI was the final nail in the coffin of his arrogance. A Port Authority officer, he might have tried to bully. An air marshal, he might have tried to outmaneuver with legal bluster. But the FBI meant federal prosecution. It meant the end. Still, his ego tried to gather a last shred of confidence, though his voice shook badly. "Agent Vale, this is a massive misunderstanding," Wade pleaded, leaning forward and gripping the edge of the table. "I'm a deputy inspector with major crimes. I just wanted my wife to have her assigned seat. The pilot overreacted. I was just—" "You were a deputy inspector," Vale interrupted smoothly, his tone never rising as he opened the folder. He did not look at Wade. He looked at the printed reports inside. "I contacted your chief of police, Preston Hale, given that you have been formally charged with a federal felony under Title 49, United States Code Section 46,504, interference with flight crew members and attendants. Chief Hale has suspended you without pay, pending an immediate internal affairs tribunal. Your badge and service weapon, which we have already confiscated from your checked luggage, will not be returned to you." The blood drained from Wade's face, leaving him gray and hollow. His mouth opened, but nothing came out. The foundation of his entire identity had just been destroyed. His authority, his career, his untouchable status. "You called the chief?" Wade finally wheezed, his chest tightening with sudden panic. "Over a seat dispute? You can't do that. You can't just strip my service away. Let me call my union representative. Get Victor Sloan on the phone right now." Agent Vale did not argue. He reached into his suit pocket, took out a sleek black smartphone, tapped the screen, and slid it across the table. The call was already connecting. The rough voice of Victor Sloan, the powerful head of the police union, filled the room on speaker. "Wade, what the hell did you do?" Sloan barked without greeting him. His voice sounded strained, furious, and exhausted. "My phone has been blowing up. Victor, listen to me. They're railroading me," Wade begged, leaning toward the phone as if it were a lifeline. "Some arrogant pilot went on a power trip, and these feds are trying to hit me with a Title 49 charge over a raised voice. You need to get the union lawyers down to O'Hare now. They're trying to take my badge." There was a heavy silence on the line. The faint sound of typing could be heard in the background. When Sloan finally spoke, his tone had changed from angry to coldly detached. "Wade, there's a video," he said. The words dropped like lead weights onto the metal table. "A passenger recorded the whole thing. It's all over social media. Major news outlets are running it. You threatened a flight attendant. You tried to pull rank on a commercial pilot. And you screamed racist stolen valor accusations at an active-duty Navy SEAL returning from a combat deployment." The room seemed to tilt around Wade. The air became impossibly thin. "Victor, I didn't know he was a—" "The union is not touching this," Sloan cut in. His voice carried absolute finality. "We protect cops who make mistakes in the line of duty. We do not protect off-duty bullies who commit federal crimes on airplanes and embarrass the entire department on national television. You are radioactive. You're on your own." The line went dead with a sharp electronic click. The silence that followed was absolute and suffocating. Wade stared at the black screen of the smartphone, unable to process the scale of his ruin. Agent Vale calmly reached across the table, took back the phone and slipped it into his pocket. Then he leaned forward, resting his forearms on the table, his piercing eyes locking onto Wade's terrified face. The maximum penalty for violating Section 46,504 includes serious federal prison time, Mr. Brackett, Vale said with the clinical precision of a surgeon. Now, would you like to waive your right to an attorney and explain why you believed your municipal badge made you king of the sky? Or should we process you for a holding cell at the Metropolitan Correctional Center? For the first time in his adult life, Wade Brackett had no comeback. There was no badge to hide behind, no union to protect him, no frightened subordinates to carry his excuses. No amount of bluster could reverse what he had done. Slowly, his broad shoulders folded inward. He placed his trembling hands over his face as the harsh fluorescent light beat down on his graying hair, and he wept. There was only the brutal, inescapable, devastating weight of karma. While Wade Brackett was being fingerprinted, stripped of his shoelaces, and led into a holding cell under the blinding fluorescent lights of a federal lockup, Lieutenant Commander Calvin Drayton was living an entirely different reality. The flight had left the gate. The twin engines roared as the aircraft climbed through the heavy, turbulent storm clouds over Chicago. The plane eventually broke through the dense gray ceiling and leveled into the clear stratosphere above. Sunlight spilled golden over the blanket of clouds below. It was the most peaceful flight Calvin had experienced in a long time. The contrast between the ugly confrontation at the gate and the quiet calm of the first-class cabin was almost jarring. For the first time since his deployment, the vigilance carved into him by years of service began to unwind. He was not scanning the horizon for threats. He was just a man going home. True to his word, Captain Whitaker made sure Calvin was treated with the utmost respect. Marissa Bell approached his seat after the aircraft reached cruising altitude. She did not make a spectacle. She simply leaned in and placed a fresh cup of black coffee on his tray table. "Thank you," she whispered, her voice still carrying genuine relief. "For stepping up. He had all of us rattled." Calvin offered a warm, polite smile. "You were doing your job, ma'am. He was just a bully who forgot where he was." After that, Calvin reclined his seat, turned his face toward the oval window, and let the steady hum of the Boeing 737 carry him into deep, restorative sleep. He did not dream of the South China Sea. He did not dream of angry men with municipal badges. He slept the heavy, dreamless sleep of a man whose mission was finally over. When the aircraft descended through the mist-heavy clouds of the Pacific Northwest, Calvin opened his eyes. Outside the window, the emerald landscape of Washington State spread beneath him. The dark waters of Puget Sound reflected the muted silver light of a rainy sky. As the wheels touched down at Seattle-Tacoma International Airport with a firm jolt, the cabin broke into a polite round of applause. It was the kind of applause passengers gave after a rough-weather landing. But when the seatbelt sign chimed off, and Calvin stood to retrieve his cover from the overhead bin, the feeling in the cabin was different, more personal. Several passengers from economy stopped as they moved toward the exit. The businessman from seat 2C offered a firm handshake and a quiet nod. "Welcome home, Commander." Calvin nodded his thanks, placed his white cover on his head, and adjusted it perfectly. He walked up the jet bridge, where the damp chill of Seattle air slipped through the seams of the tunnel. It smelled like rain, aviation fuel, and home. His heart, usually governed by the measured discipline of a military officer under pressure, began to beat hard against his ribs. He quickened his pace. His polished black dress shoes clicked sharply against the concourse floor, the rhythm matching his rising anticipation. He moved through the busy terminal, bypassed the baggage carousel since his sea bag had already arrived ahead of him, and went straight toward the main security checkpoint exit. The crowd waiting near arrivals was a thick, anxious sea of faces holding phones and scanning passengers as they emerged. Calvin stopped at the edge of the concourse, his eyes sweeping the crowd with trained precision. Then the world stopped. He saw them. Alina stood near the front of the velvet barricade. She wore his old faded gray navy sweatshirt, the one he had left behind for her to sleep in. Her eyes moved frantically from face to face. Beside her, almost vibrating with pent-up energy, was Brielle. His daughter bounced on the tips of her toes, her small hands gripping a piece of poster board covered in bright, chaotic crayon drawings of crooked airplanes and a massive rainbow. In the center, written in large, uneven letters, were the words, "Welcome home, Daddy." Calvin froze. The fatigue in his bones, the stress of deployment, the ugly prejudice he had endured in Chicago, all of it vanished. It was washed away by a wave of pure love so powerful, it nearly knocked the breath from him. "Daddy!" Brielle spotted him. Her eyes widened, bright and familiar. She dropped the poster board onto the polished floor, slipped under the velvet rope, and sprinted across the open space, completely ignoring the startled security guard. Calvin dropped to one knee, not caring about the sharp crease in his dress blues or the hard floor beneath him. He opened his arms. Brielle launched herself into his chest. The impact was the greatest feeling he had ever known. He wrapped his arms around her small body and buried his face in her hair. The sweet, familiar scent of strawberry shampoo filled his lungs. His eyes stung with tears, and this time he let them fall. Alina was right behind her. She dropped to her knees beside them and wrapped her arms around both her husband and daughter, pressing her tear-stained face into the heavy wool of his uniform shoulder. For one suspended, beautiful moment, the rest of the busy terminal disappeared. The announcements, the rolling suitcases, the rushing crowds, all of it faded into static. They were an island. They were home. "You made it," Alina whispered, her voice thick with emotion. Her fingers clutched the fabric of his coat as she kissed his cheek. "I was so worried when the airline app said the flight was delayed at the gate in Chicago." Calvin pulled back just enough to look at his wife. He wiped a tear from her cheek with his thumb. Then he stood, lifting Brielle easily into one arm while keeping his other arm wrapped tightly around Alina's waist. "We had a minor delay at the gate," Calvin said softly, his voice full of warmth and peace. "The flight crew handled it perfectly. Just a bump in the road." He did not mention Wade Brackett. He did not mention the badge, the threats, the racist accusations, or the federal arrest. That ugly, broken piece of the world had no place in this sacred moment. Afterward, the hard and uncompromising reality of justice settled the score. Calvin sat in the quiet comfort of his living room, dressed in worn sweatpants and a soft t-shirt. Seattle rain tapped gently against the large glass windows. He took a slow sip from a mug of dark roast coffee as the morning news shifted to a national broadcast. A familiar scowling face appeared on the screen. Wade Brackett. The headline beneath his mugshot read, "Former inspector indicted on federal charges." The viral video of his airplane meltdown, recorded by the businessman in row 3, had ignited a firestorm. It triggered a massive internal investigation by the city. The news anchor described the fallout with clinical precision. Wade had been officially indicted by a federal grand jury for violating Title 49. He had been permanently stripped of his badge and fired from the police department. The public outrage, combined with a review of his past cases sparked by his televised display of prejudice, led the city to freeze his pension. He now faced steep financial penalties, federal prison time, and permanent placement on the TSA no-fly list. Camille, unwilling to sink with him, had reportedly filed for divorce, citing the public humiliation and catastrophic loss of their comfortable lifestyle. Calvin watched the segment with quiet detachment. He did not feel vindictive joy at Wade's ruin, but he did feel a deep, grounded satisfaction in the balance of justice. The universe had a way of correcting itself when pushed too far. He pressed the power button on the remote. The television faded to black. "Daddy?" Calvin turned. Brielle stood in the doorway of the living room, rubbing sleep from her eyes and dragging a colorful picture book in one hand. Calvin smiled and placed his coffee mug on the coaster. Then he patted the empty space on the couch beside him. "Come here, Bug. Let's read." As his daughter climbed into his lap and opened the book to the first page, Calvin left the noise, anger, and ugly arrogance of the world behind him. He had fought hard for his peace, and nobody, no matter how loudly they shouted or what badge they carried, was ever going to take it away from him. True authority is never loud. Respect can never be demanded through intimidation. It is earned through discipline, sacrifice, and quiet dignity. The sky above Chicago became a stage for absolute justice, proving that arrogance and prejudice are fragile things. They shatter easily against the unyielding wall of truth. When Deputy Inspector Wade Brackett weaponized his badge to humiliate a decorated Navy SEAL, he forgot that character outranks a piece of metal every time. The downfall of an entitled bully became a stark reminder that karma is real, and sometimes it arrives with federal jurisdiction. In the end, this story is not only about a delayed flight or a viral confrontation. It is a testament to the quiet strength of those who serve, and to the undeniable truth that the universe has an elegant, devastating way of balancing the scales.